We continue on that vein, I think, with a really interesting session for the next hour or so, which is really about looking beyond these shores. And clearly, issues of digital ethics are global issues. These are technologies that span the world. And in terms of what we do in the UK or Europe, cannot be done in isolation from what's happening in other markets, in other territories. However, that's not to say that as Luciano Floridi, the point he made in his presentation, that if we get this right and if we get this right more quickly, then there is potential for real long-term competitive advantage for the UK in being a nation and a country that is at ease with the responsible use and practical and beneficial use of these technologies. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the next session. We're going to have a opening keynote, and then I'll ask the rest of the panel to come up, and we'll then go into a panel discussion. I will be keen to make that as interactive as possible, so please, as soon as we get into the panel discussion, do raise your hands if you want to engage. And hopefully we'll get to the end of the next hour with some really interesting insights in terms of not just what's happening in the UK, but what's happening more widely around the world. So I would like, therefore, to invite Lenny Stein up to the platform. And he is Senior Vice President of Global Affairs for Splunk, a very important member for techUK, and bringing a really interesting kind of international dimension to kick the conversation off. So Lenny, please.
Well, thank you all for inviting me to be here today. It's terrific to be here. The morning sessions were terrific and very thoughtful, and a lot of the same themes that resonate here are resonating across the pond in the US as well. So by virtue of the GDPR, today we find ourselves not just citizens of our respective countries, but also, quote, data subjects. The very term suggests the immensely powerful role that data plays in our daily lives. The present artificial intelligence hype cycle compounds our unease by raising the specter that maths are replacing humanity today in every life-affecting decision made by governments and private decision makers. If we are to realize data's full potential, we must make data trust and ethical data conduct the core of every organization's culture. In the fourth industrial revolution, aspiring entrepreneurs are exhorted to move fast and break things, to ask for forgiveness and not permission. All too often, Game of Thrones is cited as an ethical playbook. Data is often the magic elixir. If you don't achieve the end, the means do not matter. Simply discard the disproved, disruptive idea and move on to the next. Riches await, winter is coming. We have too long endured the Hobson's choice to click accept or be denied entry to the kingdom of technology. New research from North Carolina State University finds that ethical codes do not change coder behavior. The complexity, opacity, and pace of technology renders betrayals of trust hard to detect, makes cheating easy, and mitigates fear of consequences. Even the smallest competitive advantage gained through ethical compromise can determine the winner in network effect-driven, ecosystem-dependent, winner-take-most markets. Vast wealth lies in the balance. Yet change is in the air. In the United States, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink's call for corporations to serve a higher purpose has brought a sea change in thinking about the place of ethics in the conduct of business. Focus upon sustainability, diversity, and corporate social responsibility continues to gain pace. Investors increasingly understand that these factors directly impact the financial health and performance of business. Here in the UK, the British Academy has undertaken an ambitious project to develop a new framework for the future of the corporation. At its center, corporate purpose, trust, and culture. Recent analysis by Accenture identifies a direct link between corporate trust incidents and losses in future revenue. Social media enables the public rapidly to amplify and to impose real consequences for ethical missteps. Accenture's conclusion, quote, "To be competitive in today's environment, companies need to execute a balanced strategy that prioritizes trust at the same level as growth and profitability." The GDPR has forced boards and management to pay unprecedented attention to the personal data they collect, how they safeguard it, and what uses they make of it. Amnesty International's Toronto Declaration identifies laws and standards that can help assure that AI will, quote, "protect individuals against discrimination, promote inclusion, diversity, and equity, and safeguard equality." The UK has established the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation that is now just gaining pace itself. The European Commission similarly has impaneled a high-level expert group on artificial intelligence. The World Economic Forum Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution has underway a project to bring data literacy and responsible AI to corporate boardrooms across the globe. Last Friday, the center launched a new initiative sponsored by the UK government to identify ethical and responsible means of unlocking the value of AI in the public sector. Splunk is privileged to be part of both projects. The common thread in all these examples is that data ethics and the promise of AI are inextricably intertwined. For nearly the last 8 years, I've been privileged to work at Splunk, the biggest big data company most people have never heard of. Approximately 17,000 businesses, government agencies, universities, and nonprofit organizations in 110 countries use Splunk software to protect their data from cyber attacks, keep applications and networks running, solve tough business problems, comply with laws, and realize value from the Internet of Things. Just last week, Gartner declared Splunk as the market leader and visionary, most able to execute in a critical security domain, security incident and event management. At the heart of our software is the ability for our customers to access virtually all forms of unstructured and semi-structured data, to search, analyze, and visualize that data in real time, and most importantly, to take action on that data. Our software enables users to identify and select data sources relevant to a specific task, test data accuracy, monitor and alert on data processes, and determine root cause. Beyond our core markets, organizations use Splunk software to do everything from determining how many people wash their hands before leaving an airport toilet, about 75, to protecting access to electronic medical records, to assuring safe destruction of chemical weapons. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas uses Splunk software to identify students who are potentially struggling with their studies and to enable early interventions designed to help keep the students on track and to be successful in their learning. For me, one of the most moving uses of Splunk software occurred a number of years ago at a US college. A student posts a suicide message on social media. Campus authorities are alerted. Because the college had implemented Splunk software to manage their Wi-Fi network, Within minutes, the college is able to locate where the student has connected to the network and gets him help. A life is saved. Now, while the ability to determine a person's location can raise many ethical and privacy issues, as we all know, this example reminds us that sometimes it can also mean the difference between life and death. For over a decade, Splunk has had a strong presence in the UK with offices in London and Reading. Tesco, Vodafone, Gatwick Airport, John Lewis, Shazam, as many UK governmental departments today use Splunk software. Just yesterday, we announced that the Universities and Colleges Admission Services, a charity in the UK's shared admission service for higher education, is using Splunk software to monitor, detect, and act on security threats. UCAS manages almost 3 million applications from 700,000 students to over 380 universities and colleges each year. Since our earliest days, our mission has been to make data accessible, usable, and valuable to everyone. Through our Splunk for Good initiative, we have partnered with the Global Emancipation Network to use big data to fight human trafficking. We have helped enable Team Rubicon to deploy critical resources in response to natural disasters around the world. We are working with government and private entities to identify data-driven solutions to the opioid crisis. We provide Splunk training free to armed forces veterans and their families, over 6,800 so far, as well as underserved youth in the United States. This year, we launched similar initiatives in Australia and the United Kingdom, and we're proud to have signed the Armed Forces Covenant on the anniversary of the armistice. Our workforce programs provide meaningful career paths, expanded opportunity, and help bring critical diversity into the technology community. Through our Splunk Pledge program, we have provided software licenses to over 500 nonprofit organizations and educational institutions to assure that all communities can realize the benefits of digital transformation. Through the Splunk Pledge, we've committed to donate $100 million in software and services over 10 years. 2 years on, we've already donated over $30 million towards that goal. Social impact is part of every new employee onboarding, every acquisition, and many other business functions. Every quarter, we conduct a company-wide social impact activity across our 20-plus locations worldwide. At our users conference this fall, our customers stood side by side with us and packaged more than 70,000 meals in partnership with Rise Against Hunger and International Charity. These programs reflect our values as a company. They not only produce tangible social good, but also inculcate fundamental respect for human dignity, diversity, and inclusion into everything that we do. Such initiatives create ethical flywheels that unify and build trust among our employees, across geographies and cultures, and with our customers and partners. Is this commitment to social impact a source of competitive advantage? Absolutely. Does it inspire innovation? Most certainly. Does it enable us to recruit and retain top performers? There is no doubt. It also allows us to leverage our greatest strengths, our product, our people, and our passion to work on some of the most challenging issues confronting the world. Machine learning is a key component of anomaly detection and predictive analytics in cybersecurity, IT operations, and IoT use cases. In addition to incorporating machine learning in our software, we offer a free machine learning toolkit that provides access to over 300 open source algorithms. The toolkit embraces a human-centered approach, which I will contend is a 21st century and not 20th century term, to machine learning built around the discrete steps of data source identification and collection, data cleaning and transformation, data exploration and visualization, data modeling, model testing, model deployment, and ongoing model revalidation. And one of the real aha moments that I had was when I sat and saw a presentation of how actually the machine learning process works today in business, and that there are, as a necessary part of the process, human touch points at every step along the way. And this is a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity to recognize where we can make a difference in terms of ethical decisions made at each step along the way. And that the notion that all of this process is completely automated is not, in fact, in line with the reality today. Now, one of our core design principles is trusted decisions. Our CEO, Doug Merritt, has made this approach a key part of our strategy and our culture. Trusted decisions require a clear understanding of the problem to be solved, the data sources and source types required, the integrity of that data, the security of that data in use, in transit, and at rest, the tools necessary to understand and visualize that data from the aggregate down to the individual event, the ability to act on the analysis rapidly, and the incorporation of human decision-making at the critical control points. In a data-driven, cloud-centric world, trust and trusted decisions are critical to government legitimacy and business success. Cyber attacks occur in ever new and nuanced ways. They are persistent and they are continuous. Our systems must be able to detect and respond to threats at machine speed to ensure our data security. Nevertheless, Chief Information Security Officers with whom I speak consistently assert the critical importance of direct human involvement in the cyber security protection process. Machine learning, while immensely helpful, goes only so far. ML is just maths, and maths are not a substitute for human judgment. Over the past 2+ years, I have seen up close how organizations large and small have prepared to comply with the GDPR. While the approaches have varied, there is no doubt that GDPR has accomplished much already by making data use and data protection top of mind for every organization that wishes to do business in the European Union. It places data ethics front and center in organizational strategy and methods. Businesses that can't demonstrate compliance to suppliers and customers soon will be out of business. As policymakers, public servants, business leaders, and academics, our goal must be more than extolling ethics as a source of competitive advantage. Rather, we must ensure that ethical data practices are the norm, with accountability and consequences for failure to meet that standard. Ethical conduct is a responsibility, not a tactic. Progress will require data literacy, leadership, and instilling a culture of responsible data practice in our governments, in our institutions, and in our businesses. If we do it right, we will transform ourselves from data subjects to beneficiaries of data potential. It is up to each of us to lead the way forward. Thank you.
Lenny, thanks so much. And please, do you want to take a seat here? And I'd like to invite the rest of the panel up. We've got about 40 minutes to explore in a little bit more depth what's happening elsewhere around the world. And I think, there are some, maybe who have a view that, US tech firms operate in a far more kind of less regulated world, and have a much more of a laissez-faire kind of approach to some of these issues. But actually what you outlined was an approach that I think many in Europe who are real advocates for strong data protection and so on would feel very comfortable with. So, and I think that's one of the themes that we want to get into really, which is what are the similarities and differences in terms of approaches being taken around the world. So we've got a fantastic panel who can bring a number of different perspectives to this. I'm going to go straight into Cecilia. Can I ask you to introduce yourself and give us a sense of where you think, where's the European Union and in terms of what's happening in Brussels on the whole issues around digital ethics and AI ethics? How far progressed is the debate, and how far are the institutions moving towards action?
Well, I would say quite far. I mean, you mentioned the GDPR. That was the first, I would say, the first hard regulation that basically outlined data as something that is at the heart of citizens' rights, fundamental rights in Europe. Although painful to implement, especially for smaller companies, it has also brought that perspective that data is, it's gone from being like a commodity of saying, well, data is gold, is something, to understanding that it is really a matter of both security and trust. And I would say the trust element is also becoming a competitive advantage, luckily, because that will drive both the behavior you spoke about, which is that companies looks at this as something, of course they want to have trust. If they don't have trust, they don't have business. But also that governments looks at it like something where they need to collaborate amongst nations, because digital does not have any kind of borders. And which means, of course, now we see discussions in EU regulations on the cybersecurity package, which of course data security, on AI, we discuss ethics now, but we also discuss, are there actually some kind of standards or regulation needed on certain areas on AI, and what are the specific things on AI compared to just data analysis? Because just one thing, we have to remember that AI is basically just a tool, It's a very, very powerful tool, but the new thing about AI is that it can learn for itself. It can continuously learn. So it's all about intent. So how do we monitor that AI actually has the intent that it was, that a function that it was intended to actually fulfill 10 years later, if it really can develop over time by itself. So that kind of discussions are, of course, ethical discussion at the heart of the AI discussion. But I would say it actually another ethical, in my view, element that is not discussed is what is what's the news for the citizen, for the individual in this digital age. If we look at, for example, the Universal Charter of Fundamental Human Rights, if you look at the Article 26 and 27, it says that everybody has a right to education and everybody has a right to a share on the scientific advantages and benefits. If you link those two, I would say how many people out of the total population has an insight into, if you go and ask, I have 5 children, if I go and ask them, what is how are your data protected? Or how do you protect yourself through cybersecurity? I am pretty sure that even though they come from a family that is techie, they have no idea. They don't know what to answer, which means that they have no chance of having an informed and enlightened way of acting and participating in society, in a digital society. Next level, they spend maybe 8-12 hours on different devices during the day. If I ask them, I had this conversation, and not to tell that my kids do not know anything, because I actually think they know more than most kids. I said, yeah, but the chat box, it's done by coding, and they said, but how do you do it? I mean, they say like, they don't put coding and box, but how do they do this? You know, they have no idea on how the fundamental structures of technology actually works. And that is actually the biggest, to me, ethical question. Can we allow to have unenlightened population in a society that will increasingly be digitalized, yes or no? And do they now have the right to say, well, I don't want treatment. I want preventive care. I want to know before I get sick, not having treatment after I'm sick. So there is a lot of discussions around, you know, the ethics and the risk and the trust, but where there's very little discussion is also how do we actually enhance the population to ask the right question, put the right demands towards the policymakers, and actually have an enlightened way of acting in a digital society. And I would say that government that cracks that, or that entity that cracks that formula, they will have a very strong competitive advantage.
Interesting. Sana, can I come to you? In your role as head of the Office for AI, you've been on the road a lot recently, and traveling and meeting your counterparts and others around the world. What are the differences in terms of the discussions that are happening elsewhere, or are you finding that lots of people are on very much the same page and there's very similar views?
Thank you for the question. I think the answer is it varies. There are definitely like-minded nations in terms of making sure that ethics and understanding what is being done by algorithms is at the core of the questions that are being asked. And there are some that value the pushing of innovation much quicker and worrying slightly less about this. But ultimately, when you sit people down and speak to them, so there are the kind of top line conversation. So the headlines may be a little bit different, but when you get down and talk about the crux of it, actually everybody really cares about what is happening and why it's happening, and all of the questions that we grapple with. Just to pick up on a couple of points that Celia made, I think I totally agree. I think you know, what underpins all of this is trust. You know, do you trust that? Do you feel comfortable enough by what the algorithm is doing to put it into place in whatever use case you're in? And if you are, then are you? If you don't have that trust, then you don't feel that you could be accountable for whatever the decision ends up being, right? I think we are in an interesting place right now where these are the right questions to be asked, because we should be building in, just as we build in security from the outset, we should be building in the concept of ethics and understandability and all of that from the outset. That's one. The second is a lot more work needs to go into the technology to get it to a place where it can be understandable. So there's a lot more, you know, research needs to be done, right? Once we get past this initial place, I don't think we need to be in a place. I don't think everybody needs to understand exactly to the nth degree what underpins the algorithm, exactly how it's written and how it works, because we don't understand how cars work, and yet we feel trust in driving them around the streets or across the country with our children in them, right? So I think there is a point in time when the algorithms will get to a point where you feel trust and you feel that able to take accountability for putting an algorithm into place, where we will move away from that. We're just not there yet. And I think you know, it's important to keep research at the center of this. But to answer your original question, yes, I think at the bottom line is everybody's thinking about the same thing. I think it's really important.
So people are thinking about the same things, but are they doing the same things? And is there a similar level of action? And what are the kinds of actions that you see taking place around the world?
So no, not everybody's doing the same thing. we've spoken quite a lot today, I think, about what the types of things that the UK is doing, and we've talked about what the European Union is doing. So we've got, we've created the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation to help us with some of the thinking about keeping ethics and balancing ethics with innovation, so that we can continue to have a thriving ecosystem. We have the regulatory sandbox, which allows us to create new regulation in a sandbox way, so that it allows fintech and other areas to thrive. The approach that the UK has taken with regulation in emerging tech has allowed, for example, Amazon to bring their drones to the UK as the first place. And we want to continue fostering that kind of ecosystem within the UK. Other countries have taken slightly different approaches. And again, I think there is politics can play more or less of a role in some of this. And in some countries, the chosen direction, for example, has been to allow industry to help shape how things progress. Whereas in the UK, we have partnered with industry to help shape what the future could look like. So there are some variations on a theme, but the approach isn't exactly the same.
Sarah, if I can come to you. You're also somebody who's engaged in quite a few international fora around some of these issues. To what extent do you feel that the UK is in any way leading any of these debates, or do you also feel that it's there's a lot of kind of commonality in some of the action that's happening?
I think that the UK has an opportunity to demonstrate how a more ethical approach to technology and business can drive innovation. I think that's really important, as we have, as ever, the next wave of consumers being those who are, dare I say it, much younger than all of us in this room. And really, those individuals are ones who care more about their digital rights, particularly in privacy, than perhaps some of we do. So I think that's really important. I think there's a great opportunity there, particularly as companies come to the UK, particularly to London, to scale, that we have an opportunity to do that. I'm not sure we're there yet, in fact, but I do think that there are activities that we can't forget about, and I think happening elsewhere, which is a reason why we need to accelerate some of that, I think, through practical approaches that demonstrate how this works, and that are well thought through with multidisciplinary teams. I'd like to come back to one point raised just earlier on cars in a moment. But I think those areas are particularly with the kind of approach that we can see in America, where there is a lack of accountability. With Zuckerberg not attending, refusing to appear really before a select committee, but also the failure of antitrust legislation too. And then, of course, I think we have this emerging threat from China, which I think is really interesting to look at, particularly the growth of TikTok and the growth of services like WeChat, which many of our children will probably be using today. And that is really dependent on what I would argue as being a really severe surveillance state of affairs. So there are these kind of threats that I think mean we really need to accelerate that progress faster than we have been doing. And I think it's fantastic to be here talking about this today, but I would like 2019 to be the year where we have live demonstrators of how this is possible. The piece that I wanted to pick up on about cars, just briefly, at IF we do a lot of work looking at how automated systems can be trusted. And some of that research that the research we've been doing to look at that has taken us into interesting places, like Transport for London. And there's an awful lot that we can learn, I think, from organisations who have already brought automation into really important parts of their business. The one I mean at the moment is the automation of their kind of braking safety systems. What they found there was as much as they were able to automate the way that tubes brake to help drivers, so they weren't reliant so much on human intervention, actually there's this kind of skills fade over time that happens. If something is continually automated, you forget how to do it. And that's also then actually leads to new potential failures, which is when the system will inevitably fail at some point. How can you make sure that your operators know how to brake again? So TfL deliberately switched to manual braking on Sundays regularly to make sure that that skills fade doesn't happen for their drivers. And I think that we have to be really careful that humans are always kept in the loop of any automation, and particularly in AI, because we're never really going to know or be sure of what could happen. And so I just wanted to pick up on that point, because I think that whilst we don't many of us don't understand the fine-grained details of how a car works, the fact we know where the brake is really important. And in fact, having those brakes enables us to drive faster. And I think that that's really important to remember, because I think that's where this place I'm so interested in, of how you can bring better, more ethical information technologies together with an innovation of regulation will help us to see those competitive advantages. So, yeah. Sorry, I wondered.
No, but I may feel slightly differently about taking the tube on a Sunday now. I'm not quite sure. No, but Cecilia, you want to comment?
No, it's just, I think, of course, we feel comfortable to reassure ourselves that people are more clever than systems, and that human makes better decisions than machines. I would say I had a discussion early on biases, and to me, AI is one of the biggest opportunities to get rid of biases. People say, yes, but the algorithms are made by all white male. I said, yeah, but they have been that for like 2 centuries, a long time, thousands of years, right? Every decision in history have been made by a certain set of non-diverse rulers. And even discrimination, for example, in everyday life goes on again and again and again in a different situation. And here, for once, we can actually analyze, because it condenses masses of data. We can start looking at patterns and saying, oh, it was actually not intentional. It's actually not what we want. We can actually make a choice that we don't want that bias, and we don't want it that way. And so it increases something, enhances something that we have never been able to do before in a vast majority of areas. And I think we will get to a point where, again, of course, at certain safety and other things, yes, we need humans in the loop, but there will also be a lot of processes, as there is today, where people will not be needed. But there we have to make some kind of leveled approach, and we're actually working on in Digital Europe, a leveled approach on where we look at where are humans needed and where are humans not needed, depending on different kind of risk levels, depending on different kind of decision-making processes, and so on, right? I just wanna enhance, not believing that just because there's any human in the loop, we make wiser decisions, because I'm sorry, but I don't trust ourselves that much.
No, I think it is really interesting that actually in talking about AI and understanding AI and how AI works, we seem to have learned a lot more about biases that already existed in our decision-making processes that weren't automated. And it really seems to me we've had far more discussions about the issue of bias in the last couple of years than we have had in sort of decades in a way.
I just wanted to make a very quick point on this. I think you're right. I think digging into how we make decisions has allowed us, and even understanding how we make decisions so that we can create an algorithm to then automate that decision-making process, has allowed us to actually understand how decisions are being made and perhaps uncover some of the bias that we wouldn't have otherwise known existed. But I think we have a duty to make sure that there is diversity in both the data sets, but as well as the programmers of the algorithms, to ensure that we don't introduce and perpetuate bias. Because right now we do sit at the risk of, because the algorithms make things so much faster, to introduce and create an enormous amount of bias that, although perhaps did exist previously, didn't touch quite as much of the population so quickly. So I think there is, and so we run that risk of trying to, we can't wait to see it. We have to get ahead of it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of come back to, we need to understand the algorithms. We need to do some more research. We need to, take apart all of the how to make sure so not about, moving into semantic AI versus kind of deep learning or neural nets or anything like that, but I'm just saying there should be much more research into understanding exactly how algorithms are being built and making sure that we introduce ethics and watch for bias from the outset.
Yeah. There's a hand there and over there. Do we have mics in the room that we can? Oh. Yeah, let's start. Yeah, thank you.
Hi there. It's Roger Taylor from the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. I had a question for Lenny, really, just to push you to be a bit as specific as you can be in terms of what would you most like to see governments do, and that can include nothing, but what would you most like to see governments do to help you deliver the kind of future you described, in which we aren't data subjects, but as you said, we enjoy a data universe that helps us flourish?
I think the single most important task right now is data literacy. And data literacy requires a common vernacular. Day in and day out, when I speak with policymakers, members of governments in the boardroom, around the world, the lack of basic understanding of the principles is profound. And I think that the community that is concerned about these issues has everything it needs to find a common vernacular, a common glossary, and then find ways to raise the level of literacy. And I think we have to start first with with the policymakers and leadership. But I also believe that as we move forward as a society, data literacy is critical to allowing individuals to be effective citizens. In terms of judging the information sources they're receiving, which ones are credible or not, we need to bring that for the digital native generation that's rising. They have to have better understanding.
Sarah, you're shaking your head.
I have a kind of a reaction to individuals, and I think we're more broadly sort of stuck in what I would say a 1970s approach to privacy, which is very individualistic. It's kind of built around these ideas of digital solipsism, of us alone on the computer with Google, and there is no one else there. People have got, the work that we do at IF tells us time and time again that individuals are really busy. They're under more pressures now than ever before, particularly in the UK, with March approaching fast, things like universal credit. The reality for many people, particularly on the breadline, is not that they will be able to have the time, let alone be able to understand some of these issues of any form of AI or automation or digital full stop, really. And I think we have to turn this into a conversation too about really what we can do collectively. So who are the organisations that we should turn to understand some of this complexity on our behalf? Because I think also the conversation about individuals kind of forces that complexity from technology that never really goes away to the individual, which I think is actually deeply unfair. So I think it's looking to organisations that we know already, right? Like consumer rights organisations in the UK, that's Which, in the US, Consumer Reports. I think that a future will inevitably look like, like you have on food packaging, where you have, red for salts and fats, greens for healthy. There are lots of limitations to that, and I'm very aware of that. But at least it gives people the opportunity to walk into a supermarket and decide, on a Friday night, I'm going to go for the red packet. I've had green all week, but I know this is bad for me, but I want it. And I think we need to get to that point where that level of digital literacy, I agree, it should increase, but the onus shouldn't necessarily be on the individual, because practically that's not how we want to live our lives, and I think technology should support how we want to live.
I mean, the driving analogy is an interesting one, isn't it? Because in a way, there's actually shared accountability there. So there's the accountability of the manufacturer of the vehicle, But the owner of the vehicle is also responsible for having the car serviced. Now, they may not know what happens when the car is serviced, but they're responsible for making sure that it's done. And then there is the accountability of the garage or the mechanic who does the work. So you have a sort of shared accountability framework, but with very different levels of knowledge about how things work. And do you see that as somewhere we need to get to, or do you think the accountability really can sit with the technology provider and the rest of us sit there in sort of blissful ignorance of how things work?
No, I think that accountability, and I think that's particularly when you look at supply chains and data use and collection, I think becomes very interesting. Where does accountability ultimately lie? And I think it has to be a model that allows for many suppliers to take part in this information society, and so should be one that also represents the way that we know this works today in more analog systems. I think there are things we should take from that, but with an understanding that we are dealing with materials that change overnight. Fundamentally, the technology is changing at, or has the potential to change at such a rate that the product you might be accountable for one day is very different the next day. The moment you do a software update, that changes things. So it has to be resilient to that.
Can I just make one comment and add to this? I think I agree, and I think that there is a role in here for government, because it can't be left just to the tech sector on their own to decide, what is or isn't the right thing to do, and it can't be left just to the individuals. And there is a role in here for government that has a duty of care for society and the economy to foster a good economy and to make sure that society is safe and feels comfortable, confident that things are approaching in the right way. Now, this isn't to say, because I have only literally been in government for a number of years, that government knows everything, because they don't, and we've talked about that. But there is a duty in here as an institution that government has to be to provide a safe environment, whether that's through rules and regulations or through laws, or whether it's through introducing institutions that are trusted to help make some of these decisions and to own that public narrative, to say, whether it's through explaining this is what this system means, and this is what we know about it, and this is what this system means and what we know about it. Now it's up to you. So do you want to go for red or green? But I think there is a role in there for government to play.
I mean, I think the question was, what's the single most important thing? And I cannot say enough. I believe in democracy through empowerment. And we have to teach children in school what are the basics of the digital society. And just like they learn to write and read and anything else, they would know the basic rules of digital society.
Does that mean coding, or are you talking about something?
Well, I'm not a curricula specialist to design any curricula, but I mean, computational thinking, it is a creative, really, it's different skills, right? It's both about cybersecurity, data privacy, data analysis, the analysis of data and how to use data. But it's also more creative things and how to create things instead of just, before we learned to sew, but now really creating creative thinking of how can you do with a problem and what can you make out of technology in a different way. So it's really also creative thinking. So there are different skills, and it should be, I'm sure that our specialists are much
the technology companies can often be criticized for throwing everything back at education. We just need to educate people better. And that's government's responsibility, it may take 20 years. Meanwhile, we'll just continue innovating over here. I mean, that can't be the solution, can it?
And which takes me to the second point. So right now, education of the younger generations are mainly done by the government, okay? So we can discuss, is that the right system going forward? I think actually the answer is no. And I think the answer is no all the way to when we make the policies. We need to look at the policy making process. I don't believe that we need to just outsource our problems to organizations. I want people at the table. I really believe that we need to create a much more agile way of doing policies, where we have more diversity in the room from the start, saying what is the real issue or opportunity we are trying to achieve. So one of the things I would say, another thing that I would ask from governments is, please set the right goals. What do you want? What do you want with AI? You know, do you want to forecast skills for the new jobs? Could be a pretty good idea, right? If that's what you want, what is it that we need, and how do we? Are there certain risks by thinking this way, and what is it that we don't want? So another way of thinking policy. So all the way from the educational, and I think right now, I mean, Digital Europe has been driving the Jobs and Skills Coalition in Europe for 4 years now, and have re-educated more than 2 million people. That's purely industry. So industry takes a big role already, and that has to be much more coordinated in the future. So I really think there is, I mean, we have gone from an age where we have had this kind of there's the individual, there's the government and the individual, and into technology is also giving more transparency, more direct access, more individualization of services. So they have to be more aware of what they were sitting in front of.
Lenny, so you see the solution to this, or one of the solutions to this has been this much more educated and aware workforce, population, and so on. When you look around the world, do you see any countries that are doing better at that? You know, that are getting it right in terms of trying to address the kind of challenge that you set out?
Well, first, the question, let me just follow up on the question earlier, was what's the most important thing right now? That's not the only thing.
Yeah.
And as I go around the world, you know, just from my own perspective, over the last several years, I think the UK has actually done a very good job. Lots of the reports that have come out from the ICO are actually among the most understandable, accessible, and straightforward that I have seen. And we actually use them as a model in the US for thinking about some of these issues. There is certainly a lot of conversation going on in the US, a lot of thought being put into it, but I would say there seems to be less action. There's more swirling and conversation than there is getting down to practical business, at least from what I see.
Interesting. There's a gentleman here who's been very patient holding the mic.
No, thank you very much. My name's Andy Peart from Artificial Solutions. I've got to say this event has been really valuable and very, very interesting, but a little bit daunting as well. So a lot of the speakers, a lot of the people I've spoken to over lunch have really come from academia or from government agencies or from large companies. I represent a mid-sized company, 150 people, and I'm interested in using ethical AI as a competitive advantage, the subject of this discussion. I'm intrigued whether the panel has any advice for me as CMO from a mid-sized company around ethical AI.
Brilliant question. Sanna, can I come to you in terms of, where do companies like this go for practical advice and support?
Well, it depends on what the advice is about. But I mean, the short answer. But I think in terms of competitive advantage, and we've spoken before, I absolutely think that thinking about ethics at the core of your company is going to provide you with a competitive advantage when we go forward. I mean, we constantly have now in the news, and we've alluded to that a little bit in this panel, big tech companies coming to the fore based on bias or whatever it is. And they're leading the way right now, and they're, and whether it's big companies coming out with kind of their ethical principles by which they're running their institutions, or academics who will present their findings, and they talk about what Cecilia was talking about earlier, which is, my intention for this piece of work, whether it's nudging or targeting or whatever, is one thing, but how it gets used might be for a completely separate thing. So I need you to stop me. Right, this is really exciting, but I need you to stop me. So I think from the perspective of a small, medium-sized company where you are building in ethics at the core, you're absolutely at advantage as compared to someone who's already well down the way, right? You're at the forefront of it. You're putting in the systems that we're discussing today. You're thinking about that now as you develop your systems versus, say, Facebook, Amazon, Google, etc., who are now going back and saying, what what do we need to do to make sure that the things that we are doing either comply with GDPR or whatever the new, GDPR 2.0 is going to be, or whatever that happens to be. So I think from that perspective, you're ahead. But also, I think having your voice added to the conversation today, especially within the UK, where for us it's very, very important to carry this conversation forward with industry, whether it's the big tech giants or our small and medium businesses, it's really important to make sure your voice is added to that, because that helping to shape and being at the forefront of that is what drives this.
Sarah, what advice would you?
Yeah. So I think there are some things that you would do normally anyway when you embark on like a new endeavour, which is to understand, where is the team at in terms of their understanding of what an ethical AI might mean. And I think that's about bringing key stakeholders from your organisation together with the product team that will be building that. And I think when we talk about ethical AI, what do we mean? If it's the data ethics, then we're really talking about your organisation's data politics. What will you be willing and not willing to do with data? I think secondly is, what's the AI doing? At what point in a user journey does it appear? And also I think it's really, really important to look at an unhappy path. I think when we go out to look at, wanting to build a product, we look at what can go right. I think it's very important to consider what happens to all of those individuals that we might say are an edge case individual. What happens in those areas? Because I think ethical, for me, means that this is better for everyone. And I think that means you need to look to some of your more vulnerable users to identify that. And I think the third thing I would say about how do you bring a kind of ethical AI is, how are you going to measure its performance against ethics? So I think a question I have is, what are your KPIs or ways that you measure that this is ethical and we're doing good and this is working? Because I'm not convinced that in the early stages of product development that will necessarily mean that you're going to have, X zillion more users or whatever up to, when I think you need to look at that too. I would like to talk more about that, but I'm going to stop.
I must say, I really love the question, because this is where we have the big gap. We discuss ethics, but what does it mean when you're a mid-sized company and you need to make a living each day, right? So I would say my first advice, I don't know exactly what a solution you do. I don't know how to ask the right, or say, give you the right advice, but I would say there's huge opportunities in the business areas of solving the big challenges. Environment, forecasting of skills towards jobs, any kind of these big challenges. Look if you can look at algorithms in those areas. First, I just done the business idea kind of thing. On ethics and how to comply, what we actually do in the ethics group in the commission, we are looking at a real practical saying, okay, this is the development process of AI. What are the factors you have to check at certain phases to say, okay, we actually are using ethical AI development methodology, and if there is a way to sign up to that. So this is the discussion right now. First report in January, next one in March. And if you can sign up to that, well, it's the first step of some kind of harmonization in actually doing ethical AI.
And Lenny, from a large company to a sort of small and growing company?
Well, when I joined Splunk, we were 250 employees. 8 years later, we're north of 4,000.
It's a good idea.
And so when I joined 8 years ago, we already had well established a culture of ethics, a way in which we, Splunk for Good existed back then. We had a certain way that we approached our interactions with each other and with our customers. And I think that's critical, whether you're a startup with 3 employees or you have 300,000 employees. The second piece of advice I'd have is that machine learning can be adopted in bite-sized pieces. That where the ethical concerns and all the issues of how you build that in are less complex. So what I would suggest is you build the culture, then you look for ways to start building it in terms of achievable goals where you can feel more confident about the implementation of it and feeling better that you know what the upside's going to be and what the possible downsides might be, the unintended consequences.
Yeah. And I think that, like, to touch on that, I think there are two different, I have a theory at the moment that there are two different kinds of, well, there are lots of ethics, but broadly two types. There's kind of slower ethics and there's fast ethics. And I think when you are developing a product that you intend to do little to no harm to your users, which is, you know, we should all aim for, you need to equip your product teams with the ability to make fast ethics decisions. Like, I'm sending out a mail shot, you know, a newsletter, can I use a magic link? Is that okay or not? Issues with magic links are an individual can't see whether the URL that they're being sent to is considered safe or not. Like, that is an ethical question. So I think also making sure that you've had enough discussions with product teams to create the tools or information that they need to do fast ethics, and also consider how you're going to do those slower ethics, which might be far more knotty questions that you may need a member panel to come and talk with, for instance, to help you understand what do your users think is acceptable or not. So it doesn't just remain a conversation that's held within the privilege of that team. Yeah.
Thank you.
Has that been useful feedback?
It's been very useful, yes, to get some real hard suggestions.
Brilliant.
So yes.
Great, thank you.
Good luck.
We've got time for one last question, lady here.
Sorry, this isn't the easiest question maybe to answer, but as algorithms are based on sets of data and it might not necessarily be representative, how long would you expect for us, or how far away is it for us to have fair algorithms? Because I know earlier, Roger Taylor, you were mentioning HR kind of algorithms to potentially hire people and so on. And obviously you were talking about, for example, trusting algorithms like we do cars. We don't need to necessarily know the kind of how it works. So how far are we, I guess, away from having that kind of fair algorithm?
I would say, and it depends on what is soon and what is, like, can I say 1 year, 10 years? But I would say just having the discussion is accelerating non-biased data. I mean, who wants to be the company that comes out again and say, I actually launched an unfair algorithm, right? You're out of business like this, or your market share goes like that. I mean, so it is. Remember, I mean, I may be naive, but I don't believe that any company is actually set foot on ground to do harm. I mean, most company actually starts from a good idea and innovation and wants to do something cool, right? And of course it's not, and again, then it could do actually financial harm to do something like that, and on top of that. So I think we're quite close. I think we're quite close, at least. And of course there will be incidents where it goes wrong, pardon me, but it will. Because that's where we also learn and adjust and say, this was not good enough, we need to be better, right? But we have quite an advanced discussion already, and of course biases is one of the things in the framework where we check for biases. The other one is intent. As I said before, well, it was intended to do this. It doesn't, I mean, later, 5 years later, or 2 years, or 1 year, or weekly, I mean, depending on the algorithm, is it actually still what we intended it to do? So just having these kind of very detailed discussions on how we develop the algorithms and the data sets. I mean, can you imagine the amount of biased decisions done in society every day without AI? And now we have this discussion. I think it's that's kind of cool.
Sarah, are we making progress?
Yes. Yes. I wish that I could say that I think it's soon to you know, that we can get an AI that we can claim as ethical, but I think we're quite far off. And I think actually the longer that we have discussions that are helpful in certain ways, but in rooms like these, where we should actually be having these discussions in a way that's much more, I think, accessible and available to many other people, because at the same time as us having this discussion, the weaponization of data is happening. You've got services that cause deliberate harm to individuals and make them less well off, that provide disinformation that are unhelpful to democratic process. We've got really harmful actors, and whether those are intentional or not originally, that is happening. And I think we can't, you know, so that is there. I think there is. I'm not sure that the distinction of good and bad is how I would put it, but I think we're in a very grey area, and will continue to be for a while. And I think that on the flip side of this, what we've been talking a lot about on this panel has been about the transparency of training data that go into AI. And I think that's important. At the same time, there's another argument happening. Wired last week published as one of their trends for 2019 the rise of federated machine learning to provide the ability for us to have personal AI, which I think is very interesting from the perspective of how we might trust technologies. If you're able to delegate responsibility to a personal AI, for instance, to help you make decisions, how would that work? But the premise of federated machine learning is that that learning on training data happens on your device before it then gets learned to be sent to the cloud. So there is no way that you are going to know what training data has been used to train that AI. Because the whole point of it is it provides privacy over the training data in the first place. So these questions are shifting really quickly, and I think we need to have far more nuanced, detailed discussions directly with those individuals too, who are also building these technologies to accelerate to a place where we might think about ethical AI. My hope is very much that we have a future where we have better, more ethical information society, and so I think these things must be possible. I feel very hopeful, but I don't think we're there yet.
Sue is waving at me, which means that we've got to the end of our allotted time. So I thought it was a fantastic way to end, because I think the point that you're making there is there are going to be no end of these further questions that we're going to be presented with, and what we actually have to do is really make sure that we've got the mechanisms, the resources, the capacity and the capability in place to be able to sequentially work our way through these in real time, and not allow the innovation to get too far ahead of us. And actually, that's kind of going to be the subject of the final panel of the day, so a very nice kind of segue. Can I just ask everybody to join me in thanking what I think has been a really fantastic panel?